channel, Treetop Flight, where I'm documenting the build of my RANS S21 airplane. First, a disclaimer, none of my videos are instructional videos. I'm a first-time builder, just documenting my build. Some of the content might have interest to others. In this episode, I install the forward bottom skin, as well as get started installing the landing gear. I do run into a problem with some tools due to a new design of a bolt head. Kind of interesting, but I'll get into that in the video. And I do deviate from the manual a little bit on the match drilling, and I'll cover that as well. But other than that, everything went pretty well. Let's get started installing that bottom skin. After doing a lot of match drilling with these cage tabs into your skins, you get all your holes pre-drilled on your sides and underneath the bottom. Then they have you take a Sharpie and mark on your bottom skin from the inside the location of all your cage tubes so you can place stringers in there. So I've done that with the Sharpie. This is where it gets a little confusing, and I'm going to do it a certain way, and this is just the way I did it. Number 8, you still have your skins clecoed, and it talks about putting the stringers in and taping them on, both for the bottom, and there's some stringers that go on to the side as well. I've seen other builders put the stringers on while the skin is on a table, so I'm going to wait to put the stringers on until I get the skins off. But then the next step says to remove the belly and side skins, refer to figure 30, 10E30 for hole spacing, drill the holes in the bottom flange of the side skins. Well, as I think this through, if you've got the skins off, you're only going to drill into the side skins. Here's your hole spacing chart along here. Then how are you going to get them into the bottom skins? It would seem, as having the skins clecoed on in place, that I should drill them now and go through both the bottom skin and the side skin so they match up while the skins are clecoed onto the cage. So that's what I'm going to do. It seems like the best way to get the rivets lined up, or the rivet holes lined up. Even though this says to remove the skins first, I'm just not sure how I'm going to get the holes up to the bottom skin doing that. This is just my approach to it. If you have comments, or if it doesn't work, I'll let you know in a subscript here. Okay, I did get the bottom match drilled to the side. As I mentioned, they had recommended starting with the side skin and drilling up. I followed a recommendation from Steve at Cleared Direct. Thank you very much for the advice. It worked out well, and started coming down on them from the top. And once you get the first pilot hole in, you put the side skin in, and then it's easy to come down. So that worked. I did nick my powder coating in 2 places before I got better at it. I'm gonna patch those up just because I don't want powder coat or steel cage exposed for corrosion issues. So be careful. You got to make sure these rivets come in inside that cage frame, and then you have to measure where these places are so you don't come in on top of those. So it's just a matter of measuring and moving along. But I've got that done. I've got to drill out my gear leg holes and then clean everything up and get my stringers. And I'm not sure if they're called stringers, but they go to the bottom. And I've got to get those attached and then cleaned up and primed, and I think we're ready to go after that. Okay, another shout out to Steve at Clear Direct and the value of watching prior builder videos. Right here where the front and back side panels attached, there are 2 pre-drilled holes on a little flap that attaches these 2. There's a 3rd hole that needs to be drilled here. If you look at the parts diagram, it's not talked about in the text, but it is in the parts diagram. So when I take these off the table, I'll match drill a hole through that flap to put a 3rd rivet spot there. Good call out. Thanks for the observation. Okay, the manual has you, before finishing and riveting your bottom, is to drill out for your gear. I think they're 5/16, 3/16. Oh, don't quote me. They're in the manual. I don't have it in front of me. If you're building a tail dragger, remember your main gear is more forward. You've got two bushing cutouts here and then one here. your gear comes across kind of this way, and you bolt them in from the bottom in here. If you've got a trike, your main gear is going to come back here more towards your panel, underneath your panel. You've got two here and one up here. So different places. Don't drill out the wrong holes. Understand your configuration and where your gear is going to go. I have the bottom skin off, and I don't know if you can see the tracing, but I've got the cage frame traced out onto the bottom skin. They give you a diagram for these stringers here and a pattern that they're going to go on. I actually looked at another video also to make sure I was clear on that. The stringers come in a package, and they're already pre-cut at 24 inches. I was looking for a couple more 10-footers like the other stringers, but these are pre-cut and they come with a boot cowl. So if you're looking for them, they're wrapped in brown paper and they're pre-cut in 24 inches. They still need to get cut to fit the pattern, but you lay it out on the pattern, and it's actually, they're not riveted, they're two-side taped on there, and it's just to prevent some pillowing of the skin. So I've got to run down and get some two-sided tape from Home Depot or somewhere. In the meantime, I think I'm going to prime this prior to running off. Where the skin comes in contact with the cage, you've got dissimilar metal issue, so that needs to get primed. So I'll get that primed, run down and get the tape, and we'll work on the side skins. I've got the skins primed. The stringers are taped on. I say taped on because you use a two-sided 3M tape. Everything's primed and clecoed back into place. Remember that you've got two rivet holes up by your landing gear. They're going to be flush rivets, and you got to dimple the skins. Whether you've got the trike or the tail dragger will depend on which ones they are, but check your diagrams. I've got my labels to determine which material I'm going through so I don't confuse on which rivets I'm supposed to use. And I think I'm all set to start riveting my bottom and side skins. I've got the skins riveted on, antennas on. We've got riveting except where the cowling's going to meet up and some other skins. We've got that first row of rivets out. We flip the frame over, or the fuselage over, to start working on the landing gear. The first steps in the tail wheel landing gear is to take your diagram pages out, get your parts out for your gear, and it looks like it's a fairly simple attachment onto the cage. The gear legs go on pretty straightforward. You've got 3 bolts, a 3/8 and a 5/16, 2 5/16 that you've got to get in there. The only kind of things to watch out for is, one, these are torqued down. The smaller ones at 140 pounds, the larger 3/8 at 190. If you don't do it freehand by any stretch, I was surprised at 140 and 190. It was less than I probably would have put on if I was just doing it by eye, kind of determining, which you shouldn't do with any aircraft bolt anyways. But be specific, because these don't tighten down as tight as you might think. Use the 140, 190. The other thing is there is a plate that goes in under here, and that's this plate here. It does have 2 orientations. You can see the hole is further to one side than the other, and then one side is flatter than the other. The flat side goes up against the cage, and the hole, the distance, is so that it covers the longeron in the cage. If you go the other way, it's not clamped fully down to the cage. So do watch the orientation. In those 2 items, they do give you a diagram that talks about the orientation, and they do tell you it's important to make sure you're torquing those at the right amount. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward. Just a couple bolts and plates, and they go right on. The next step is to start working on the main gear wheel and brake installation. You start with getting parts laid out. You've got the 2 wheel and brakes wrapped up, some miscellaneous bolts and washers, and then some instructions to start working from there. there is a manual that is provided, and if after you read through it and get some of the information, the instructions start here inside the manual. But when you look at this picture, it does look different than what you've got. So they've sent a separate page showing the picture of the actual caliper that is sent to you. I think I saw one of the other builder videos where they said these are a little bit stronger brakes for the heavier plane and the braking capacity. So this is a larger caliper. So the instructions are consistent, but it looks like you're using the diagram that they sent as a separate supplement. And you start by taking these 4 screws out, and then from underneath here you pull out these spacers and the actual pads, so you're separating it from the disc. Well, thank goodness for builder videos, and a shout out to Steve at Clear Direct. Helped me through this by watching his video. The first step says to get familiar with your drawings. Well, you've got this schematic, you've got the supplemental page they've sent you, and you've got the book, the manual that they sent you with some blow-ups of parts. And the next step says to bolt the caliper mount and axle to the gear leg assembly. Well, there's nothing listing here what a caliper mount and axle is, but you do see an awful lot of parts labeled number 6, which is this part altogether. So really the first thing to do is to start taking this apart, and a lot of these pieces and parts are contained in here. I wasn't sure if I should snip these. It kind of seemed like I should, but nothing really says take and start taking this hub apart. So I'm going to start snipping and taking things apart, and hopefully what I'm looking for is this piece here that goes to my gear leg assembly. Okay, after snapping those zip ties, it looks like there's a cotter pin and a nut holding this. And again, there's no real instructions about this. I'm just starting to take things apart, and I'm good at taking things apart. So I'm going to remove the cotter pin and this nut, and I'm assuming that the rest of this will fall out. As expected, this came out. Okay, you're going to get your axle out of the package of assembly parts, and you bolt that on with 2, I think they're 5/16 on the top and 3/8 on the bottom, and they go through. Then you've got this caliper section that is going to slide in through here, and then from there your wheel assembly is going to come on the outside. Make sure your fill valve, your fill valve is going to be on the bottom, and this is the valve that your brake assembly, your brake line is going to attach to. This just really exposes some threads, and on my second caliper I have to flip it around, but I'll explain that in a second. Something else I haven't seen other builders or videos talk about, these calipers come with a fill tube on one side and then a little plug here. If I take this plug out, you basically have the threads which you connect your flare tube, and that's your brake line up to the brakes. The connection tube needs to be on the top, because your tube can't, your brake line can't wrap around and go down to the bottom. And that's fine if you're mounting your brakes on one side, but as you flip them around the other side, you end up with this fill valve on top. So you have to change this valve from this side to this side, so when you put them in on the other side of your brakes, they both come the same way. You need your brake line connector at the top. There's clearly some kind of sealant in here. I Googled, and a lot of auto mechanics just say, oh, use tape, use Teflon, use this and that. But this is a brake fluid can break that stuff down. So I did check on this Loctite 567, which is a petroleum sealant Loctite that you used for your gas tanks, and everyone's saying that that's appropriate. I'm not recommending it because I couldn't really find an official website. Just other builders said this would be appropriate because it is a petroleum-based or preventative sealant, rather than just using Teflon tape or Teflon paste. In either case, I wouldn't use tape. I would use the paste. The tape has a tendency to break down and shred. At a minimum, use the paste. But I would definitely go with a, because you're holding up brake fluid, I'd go with a petroleum-based. I've got the pads sitting down here. I think they clamp on after. And unfortunately, once again, the manual doesn't give you anything. It just says, assemble the wheel and brake as per the parts manual. Well, you come over here to the parts manual, and what page I thought was going to give me step 1 through 5 turns out to be the page on how to change the bearings after it's, or the pads after it's already installed in the axle. So this isn't really installing the original package. Then you come, and this is just an explosion view of the whole thing. Doesn't really say how to put it together. And then you come over here, and everything is just labeled part 6, part 6, part 6, which is all of this. So I followed some other videos, and apparently this has got to come apart. You've got to get a hex nut in here and take the disc off, and then I believe you've got to separate the rim. And I'm just going to keep following builder videos because there's no step-by-step instruction anywhere that I can find. Maybe I'm missing it, but we'll just start taking this apart and we'll see how it goes. Okay, this is the kind of wheel assembly that's sent by the factory. I've taken the guts out, but now it looks like that this has got to come apart. We've got to split this rim anyways to get the tire onto it. I've gone tubeless, but that doesn't. We still need to split this. And in order to split this, we need to undo these bolts, which are protected. The nuts on these are protected by this disc. So this disc has got to come apart. Not a lot of instructions on it, but I watched some other videos on it. And this apparently is a T25 star bit. Remember the star bit? They're actually called Torx bits, but we always refer to them as star bits. This is a T25, and when I go to put it in here, it's clearly too loose. It should be a nice snug fit. That's the whole purpose of this, and I'm going to strip something. So that's not the right size. So after doing some research and taking this down to Home Depot, and I didn't have a T30, which is the next size up from the 25. I don't know how they figured out the numbering system. The T30 is too big. So that doesn't make sense. So I called the manufacturer, and these have actually, although they look like the traditional star bit, Torx has changed their shape a little bit, and these now have plus sizes. So this turns out to be a 27 plus, and after waiting and having the wrong thing shipped, they've changed the top shape. I think they flattened it out. I heard a little bit about patents. Supposedly this has better grip, but literally the last video I saw was only a couple months old, and this was a T25, so they must have just converted. No one's heard of these Torx bits. If you go to Harbor Freight to get Torx bits, you go to Pep Boys or Napa or anything, none of them's heard of this plus size bit. They all have the traditional size. So I ordered them online. Unfortunately, they sent me the wrong ones, and then I had to reorder. So this has been about 5 days waiting for my right bit to come in. But it is, you'll see it's a 27P. I don't know if the light's on that right, but the 27P is the size that you need to get these out. So again, new learning experience. Got myself a couple bits. Always adding to the tools, and not to ramble on, but that's what you need to get these out in order to get to the next ones to split the rim apart. Okay, probably a good place to end the video here. I've mentioned previously that I am trying to shorten the length of my videos. Sometimes I think they're just too long to catch someone to watch the whole thing. So I've been trying to keep them under 20 minutes, see how that goes. I certainly have enough content for at least a couple more. I've been a little slow on getting the content out. It's just, editing takes time, and it's just with all the other things. This month was kind of a slow month anyways. I had a roof leak, I had a pipe leak, and I spent time doing house repairs, so I had a fairly slow month in build time as it was. But fairly straightforward. This section of build took me 26 hours. That brings my build time to date on the project to 602 hours. This section was pretty straightforward, not much complication, a little bit of study, a little bit of research, a little bit of problem with that Torx bit that I explained, but got through it all, and onward and upward. So we'll try and get another video out shortly. But remember, dream it, just build it.